Hello everybody, my name is Joseph Wilson, and today I'll be presenting my research entitled The Empire Strikes First, the Expropriation of the English Commons and the Rise of the Resistance. The core claim of my work is simple, but it challenges how we normally think about empire. Before England conquered the world, it conquered its own people. Their first act of empire was not overseas expansion, it was the internal theft of the commons, the criminalization of the poor, and the focused use of English labor to fuel colonial projects. Just as important was the resistance that followed. Groups like the Levelers and the Diggers, they produced some of the earliest articulations of democratic ideals, human rights, and popular sovereignty. Slide 2, please. I'll move through 5 major themes: the enclosure of the English commons, the creation of a vagrant class, vagrancy, forced labor, and the colonial labor pipeline, the rise of the Levelers and the Diggers, and the long-term legacy of their ideas. The English commons, which were shared open fields, existed for centuries. They fed rural families, allowed subsistence farming, and functioned as the material foundation of village life. But between the 1500s and 1600s, those lands were increasingly fenced, walled off, and claimed as property by private owners. The changes that followed were enormous. The eviction of small landholders, conversion from subsistence farming to commercial agriculture, the rise of wage labor, and this all worked to transform the land into a commodity. Enclosure didn't just take land, it manufactured a landless class. And suddenly, centuries-long rights were criminalized. Another part of this process was the dissolution of the monasteries, which destroyed medieval charity systems. Without access to the commons, tens of thousands were uprooted, and once the people had no land, no home, the state redefined them. They were no longer peasants, they were vagrants. The stigma marked them as dangerous, diseased, and expendable. New laws authorized brutal punishments such as whipping, branding with a V, the removal of their ears, imprisonment, and execution. 100 years after enclosure began, England's population of landless poor had multiplied 12-fold. At the same time, Spain and Portugal were getting rich off of their colonies in America, and England wanted in. But empire requires labor, so it turned to its excess population it had just created. Many of the people punished as vagrants were captured and transported to the New World and forced into servitude. In Virginia, the Caribbean, and later American colonies, they became the earliest backbone of forced labor. This was a precedent that would later be expanded and racialized in the institution of chattel slavery. A common phrase from the newly available English Bible at the time summed up their place in the new hierarchy: the hewers of wood and the drawers of water. This phrase was used ironically to reference the forced labor of common people. Joint stock companies like the Virginia Company openly described themselves as business ventures built on capital investment and labor extraction. So before England expanded outward, it first extracted labor from its own dispossessed poor. Elites knew they were lighting a fuse. In England and in the New World, workers, sailors, servants, and transported laborers began cooperating and organizing. Francis Bacon, the famous philosopher and a Virginia Company investor, saw firsthand how dangerous this could be. During the food riots at Enslow Hill in Oxfordshire, rebels like Bartholomew Steere were fighting for a better world. Steere wrote, "We shall have a merrier world shortly. I will work one day and play the other." He was later interrogated and tortured in Bridewell Prison at the hands of Francis Bacon and his officers. In 1622, Bacon penned the dialogue, an advertisement touching a holy war. In it, he addressed the rebellion and blamed what he called the multitudes, groups like Native Americans, Jews, pirates, and vagrants. Bacon compared himself and his scientific-minded elites to Greek heroes like Hercules, framing the multitudes as monstrosities that must be destroyed. With this in mind, he cautioned the only chance of healing the growing breach was to engage the country in some popular quarrel abroad. The Protestant Reformation had taken place about 100 years earlier, and this, paired with the printing press, made the Bible readily available to ordinary English people. This was explosive. Peasants now had not just literacy, but a religious basis for rebellion. Antinomian ideas took hold. This was the idea that Christians were answerable first to God and not to the laws of the king. This inspired radical defiance, and Baptists became powerful carriers of literature and agents of resistance networks. The English Civil War erupted as commoners and parliamentarians resisted the expropriation of the commons and the abuses of the people. Out of the Civil War, protests and petitions, a group emerged. Their enemies called them the levelers. They accused them of wanting to level all of society so that everyone was equal. This was one of the earliest movements in English history to articulate natural rights, religious freedom, popular sovereignty, regular elections, and limits on government power. Their political blueprint was a pamphlet called The Agreement of the People. It called for 2-year parliaments, civil liberties, and an end to impressment, which was forced service in the military. These were revolutionary proposals at the time, and they came decades before the writings of philosophers like John Locke. In 1647, the parliamentarians had won the Civil War, and the victorious soldiers of the new model army came together at St. Mary's Church in a town called Putney. They were there to petition the government for rights they'd been promised but not given, and tensions were high. The resistance leader, Colonel Thomas Rainborough, represented the common soldiers. In those debates, he demanded equality before the law, trial rights, religious toleration, and the end of impressment. His most famous assertion still echoes, "The poorest he that is in England hath a life to live as the greatest he." He called the enclosure of the commons the greatest tyranny in the world. He declared that God's command, "Thou shalt not steal," condemned the very theft of the commons. Across from him sat Oliver Cromwell, defending hierarchy, property, and obedience. This moment was a crossroads, one future with the commons and without slavery, and another future without the commons and with it. History chose the latter. Shortly after the debates, Thomas Rainborough was assassinated, and a new, more radical group was formed. Under the leadership of Gerard Winstanley, the Diggers took the torch. Their pamphlets declared that no branch of humanity should rule another, that the earth belonged to all people, and that the spark of God that governed creation existed in everyone. Winstanley argued bluntly that land ownership itself was a form of theft enforced by war. That land was made to be a common livelihood for all, without respect of persons. This phrase, "without respect of persons," comes from the Bible. In Acts chapter 10, verse 34, Peter says, "Of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons." To the diggers, this meant universal equality before God. It was a core principle of their resistance, a declaration that no wealth, status, or title could make one person inherently better than another. We can see this truth echoed again and again in resistance and human rights movements throughout the following centuries. Slide. In a few short years, Oliver Cromwell and his army crushed the resistance movement. He went on to invade Ireland using the same tactics as the enclosure of the commons. You could call it Expropriation version 2.0. And it set in motion a rhythm of terror, slavery, and genocide that rolled across the earth for the next 300 years. The resistance may have died, but their ideas survived. We can see them. We can see them in the Age of Revolution. We can see them in the abolitionist movement. We can see them in the Irish fight for independence, and also in the civil rights movement. And we can even see them today in modern human rights struggles. All of these movements reflect the leveler and digger belief that sovereignty is not reserved for the ruling few. It's a God-given right of all people. Slide. So to conclude my presentation, empire did not begin with the colonies, it began in England. Enclosure was the first conquest, and vagrants were the first colonial laborers. And wealthy elites have been repeating this process in different places with different people ever since. The earliest cries for equality, democracy, and human rights didn't come from educated elites. They came from the dispossessed English peasants who turned to scripture, agitation, and revolt to resist the theft of their world. Their story matters because it reminds us that democracy did not trickle down from philosophers, it was demanded by the poor. They fought for it in the fields and in the towns, and they paid for it in torture, death, and exile. The legacy of their ideas continues to shape our modern world. Thank you. I do have a small musical component that I'd like to add to this. So this comes from the resistance movement that I just spoke about, and it was written by the leader of the Diggers, Gerard Winstanley. Slide, please. It's called The Diggers' Song. Thank you for listening. That's it. Is there any questions? Thanks again. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wondered what inspired you to add a musical component.
When I was doing my research, I found that song. So I'm a musician. I've been playing since I was 10 years old, and I heard it, and I just imagined them sort of walking through the fields with their scythes and hoes to a town to protest and singing that on their way, and I just think it was very powerful to me. And so the chord progression was easy, and I figured I could play it.
So we read Thomas More's Utopia, and I don't know if you've read that or not, but he addresses that issue of the land being taken away from the people, and there's a philosophical discussion about punishment, and now all of a sudden you have this body of people, who are moving into crime, theft. So they talk about how to punish a criminal, and there had been capital punishment for theft at that point. And they were exploring the justice of that, and Moore indicts kind of what's happening, in terms of, and so he advocates, one of his strongest ideas that he advocates is the abolition of private property. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, that was written in 1511, and so it was, for us, your presentation is wonderful context, and then we've just been reading Milton about, you know, his response to the Civil War. So it's good for us to be here in your presence.
I'm really happy it worked out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I don't know how familiar with this, but I know there's sort of like similar problems to the whole like employment of commons in other imperial states, like in Rome, the late Hellenistic period, and also like Sassanid Persia, or also similar labor movements, and also you know you kind of saw the same formation of these agricultural states.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you're familiar with those.
Yes, I am, and not as familiar as I am with this, of course. I chose this for two reasons. One, because History 116, History of the Americas, but also because just in terms of our society and what our society has grown from, that to me is sort of the direct sort of where it can, and I mean, you see it with the Native Americans.
Yes.
You see they're doing the same thing in the transatlantic slave trade, just this commodification of everything, land, humans, everything. And so yeah, no, definitely has happened multiple times. And I think anytime there's an elite class of people that, you know, thinks themselves above, they're going to do things like this. And you know, it's not as if there's any great redemption, but the ideas that inspire fighting back and standing up and speaking out, I think that's the important thing. And you know, we can see in history that there is a bit of redemption, and there is a move in the right direction. But I mean, look at everything that's happened now. You know, it's always happening. I think the important thing is that people stand up and speak out against it.
This is sort of continuing a bit of that. So would you say that you're talking about sort of moving in the right direction? Do you think we're eventually going to get there, or are we just going to keep kind of repeating the same process?
That's a big question. I mean, when I think about that, I'm also like very interested in a lot of spiritual movements, and I think about the Buddhist, the Bodhisattva vow, right? The Bodhisattva knows it's never going to be done. Knows the work's never going to be done, but does it because it's the right thing to do. Continues to work for the alleviation of suffering because it's the right thing to do, not because there's an end in sight. I hate to say it like that.
I think there's a similar concept in like Scandinavian literature, I think. I'm not super familiar with it, but we have sort of the idea of doing the right thing even if you know you're going to fail.
Yeah. Because it's the right thing to do, not because you're going to get anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we have a real estate baron who's president right now, and the people that are articulating sort of peace plans.
The people
for
that are
both,
what? I'm sorry?
who are articulating or working on peace plans for both Ukraine and also Gaza have backgrounds in real estate, you know, and have kind of business schemes in mind in terms of how, you know, land is going to be sort of reconceived there, which is very disturbing.
Well, to me, it's just they're trying to gentrify the world.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And what happens? Where do we go? Where do they go?
Right.
That's the
right.
question. Where do they go?
Yeah. You know, in your slides on, you know, just kind of taking the dotted lines and going forward in our country with the civil rights movements, like some of the images you shared. Actually, when you pulled your guitar out, I thought you were going to play something from Woody Guthrie.
Yeah, could have easily been this. Could have easily been, right? Yeah, of course.
But you know, when we think about progressivism in this country, we think of civil rights, and but the reconception of private property is something I don't necessarily hear a lot about. Although, like, California seems to be a place where that needs to be thought of because of the cost of real estate and the way that it's kind of excluding people. But I'm just wondering, like, and for all of you guys, if you hear anything about property reform or you know, about moving away from private property. To me, I think it's a huge thing that needs to happen, but I'm not hearing a buzz in the ground about, like, you know, people talking about that or singing about it.
I don't either. I know that last night I was at a meeting and I was looking across the street to where it used to be the, we called it the Chicken Shack, but like there was this great, it was a family-owned place. They made chicken burritos for ever since I was a kid that was there. And now it's this huge, you know, brutalist, you know, looking
Interesting.
kitchen chef, like fancy thing. And I'm just like, and it's closed. It's closed on a night when the old one would have been open,
Yeah.
and everyone would have been there.
Yeah.
And this is what I see, this sort of gentrification, and you know, and it's not, yeah, it's not. I don't think it's the right direction, but yeah, I don't hear people talking about it either. So
Can I ask you a question? Of the research that you did, what book would you recommend was the best read?
The Many-Headed Hydra by Marcus Rediker and Linebaugh and Rediker. It is
What is it?
The Many-Headed Hydra.
Thank you.
And it comes from that idea that the multitudes, the Francis Bacon idea, where he framed the multitudes as monstrous, that the elites were like the Greek heroes that needed to slay the many-headed Hydra. And it goes all the way from, you know, really like late Middle Ages. It's kind of, you get some, and it goes all the way until like the abolitionist movement. And it's all around the Atlantic Basin. It's just an amazing, amazing book.
Cool, thank you so much.
Who wrote it?
Peter Linebaugh and Marcus Rediker, two historians.
Linebaugh.
Sounds about right.
I'm sure you'll find it. And Marcus what?
Marcus Rediker.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.